I'm Julia. Welcome to my channel, Freestyling It at Sharing the Discovery. We read a lot of books together in the year 2022. I have compiled a list of the 36 chapter books that I have read aloud to the kids this year and thought I would share them here. Maybe if you're looking for some good chapter book suggestions, you may find a title or two here that may be of interest. Well, without further ado, let's get started. We began our reading journey of 2022 with this classic by Laura Ingalls Wilder, who writes of her experiences as a 4-year-old on the American frontier of 1871. Full of engaging stories of family life and interesting details of the survival skills necessary to live in undeveloped Wisconsin, this first in the Little House series was satisfying and heartwarming. One of the stories that received the most discussion from my children and I was about Laura's cousin, who, while out in the fields, assigned to help his dad and uncle with the harvest, decided instead to play pranks and paid dearly for his choice when he stepped on a bee's nest during his folly. We picked this volume up initially during our unit study on birds, and with the character of Pete and Cottontail as our guide, we came to be acquainted with many different birds that make their home in North America over the summer. In story form, we were given the opportunity to gain a comprehensive understanding of bird life, including learning about their physical appearances, eating and nesting habits, and songs and calls, all through the interactions of Peter with his bird friends. While this way of representing information is one of the most interesting ways to aid learning, I felt that the writing did drag a bit at different times, and with 45 chapters, I felt like we had got the gist of things by chapter 20 or so, but my oldest in particular wanted us to keep at it, and so we did end up reading through the whole book. Joan Fox is a classic work of children's fiction that I became familiar with and enjoyed as a child because it was included as a read-aloud in the Sonlight Curriculum my mom used to homeschool me. This story follows young Willie as he enters the national dog sled race with the clear intention to win, and is undeterred even as he prepares to race against champion racer Stone Fox. Winning this race has great import for Willie, as the prize money would go towards saving his grandfather's farm, which is on the brink of foreclosure. We read the book and then watched the movie, and both ways of experiencing this exciting story left us satisfied at its conclusion. This book made it on our reading list this year because my daughter had received several Paddington picture books in her Christmas stocking. I thought it might be nice to have a fuller experience of the story of this well-known bear, and we did indeed enjoy the adventures, or perhaps misadventures, that Paddington got himself into as he adjusted to his new life with the Brown family in London after emigrating from Peru. It became evident that we were in for quite a ride when, on his very first night with the Browns, his attempted bath became a flood that came close to filling the entire house. Set during the Nazi occupation of France, this book is a thoroughly engaging, age-appropriate wartime story. Without being explicit, it is entirely evident that 10 Jewish children are in great danger and require a safe place to take shelter. Told from the viewpoint of 20 French children who are boarding at a school in the countryside, they agreed together to hide these Jewish children as if they were sheltering the baby Jesus who was fleeing from Herod. When 2 German soldiers arrive on the scene, their play acting takes a serious turn as the children are forced to withstand interrogation and harassment while concealing their endangered visitors. This was another book that I read as a school selection when I was young, and it is both engaging and formative. A Question of Yams is a short missionary story that takes place in Papua New Guinea and is based on true events. The narrative brings us along with the questions a young boy faces when his father prays to the God of the Bible instead of the spirits when he plants their essential crop, yams. The book was introduced to me as part of the Sonlight Curriculum, and it addresses the absolutely critical issue that faces anyone who grapples with belief. Who is the most powerful ultimate being that is worthy of our faith and trust? Originally, I checked this book out of the library as an optional resource to have on hand if there was further interest in learning about astronauts and space travel after we did a unit study on stars and astronomy. It turned out there was interest, and this book further solidified that interest with its exciting depiction of the true story of the Apollo 13 mission. We were sitting on the edge of our seats as one disaster happened after another, causing the spacecraft to malfunction and placing the astronauts in grave danger. The story details the miraculous set of interventions that eventually brought them back home to Earth. I found this book while browsing the Sonlight catalog for good read aloud options for my children's ages, and was intrigued by the plotline of a young boy releasing a balloon with his address attached, which was then found by a farmer who wrote back and included a mystery gift. The young boy, whose name is Gregory, goes on a hunt to discover what the mystery item is, before he writes back to the farmer, including a mystery gift of his own. They continue to write each other by sending mystery gifts back and forth until one truly amazing gift brings them together in person. The story of Rickshaw Girl, which I found out was recently made into a movie, we are introduced to the plight of a family with 2 daughters in Bangladesh. 10-year-old Namia chafes at not being able to contribute to her family's finances because of the limits placed on females in Bengali culture, but determines that she will do what she can, even if it means taking risks, like disguising herself as a boy in order to get work. Sarah Mackenzie of Read Aloud Revival introduced me to this author by having Matali Perkins' Steeped in Stories, a collection of musings on several much-loved classic children's novels, as a mom's book club book. After reading Perkins' thoughts on others writing for children, I wanted to familiarize myself with her contributions to children's fiction, and thus I came upon this, one of her many children's books. Perkins' storytelling is clear, engaging, and meaningful, and it felt like a privilege to have been able to read this to my children. As another Sonlight selection, I was so pleased to be able to read this classic book to my children, and for them to engage the story of 3 friends in America in the 1940s, who in the course of events come across a settlement of Syrian immigrants. This book was one of the novels that Matali Perkins wrote about in Steeped in Stories, which was the motivation I needed to pull this from the shelf. Reading this story gave us the opportunity to consider how we might relate to those who seem different from us because of their background, culture, heritage, etc. The conclusion of the story gave us a wonderful example of how difference can come to be understood and even honored in the context of a caring community. The Secret Valley is a story set in the American Gold Rush of 1849, told from the perspective of 2 children. I read this book as a supplement to our unit study on precious stones and gems, and it came highly recommended as it's also included in the Sonlight Curriculum. We were not disappointed, as the story portrays the difference between the drive to gather material wealth and the realization that true treasure is often much closer to home, all in a simple, family-friendly tale that takes place on the American frontier. As another supplement to our unit study on precious stones and gems, The Treasure Hunt, which is based on actual events, became another worthwhile contribution to our thoughts on the worthiness of seeking and gathering wealth. We follow the Yoder family as they move in search of farmland and encounter different challenges as they adjust in life on the Colorado frontier. Young Joe Yoder, who has heard exciting stories of the area's gold rush, secretly tries his hand at panning for gold as a possible way to contribute to his family. A chance meeting with a local gentleman who panned for gold for many years as a younger man leads them both to discover the real treasure of relationship and belonging. On our reading list last year was McBroom's wonderful One-Acre Farm, the introductory book in the humorous and imaginative McBroom series. McBroom the Rainmaker, like the first book in the series, is full of tall tales involving Josh McBroom, his wife Melissa, and their 11 children. Elements within this story include mosquitoes the size of small buildings, and fertile soil that grows mammoth vegetables as soon as you plant the seeds, and more. These tales are meant to delight the imagination and stimulate the giggles. Also featured on our reading list last year was one of Beverly Cleary's books about the mouse Ralph and his motorcycle. As my oldest in particular is a fan of motors and cycles, it made sense to include another book by this author in our reading this year. In this, the first book in the series about Ralph, we find him living in a fairly battered resort hotel in California, subsisting on crumbs left by the hotel's temporary inhabitants. Ralph's life changes dramatically when Keith and his parents arrive to stay for a night, and the mouse becomes acquainted with the boy's toy motorcycle, initiating the start of his adventures. Read Aloud Revival Premium's summertime program had us reading through the Sarah, Plain and Tall series. We started with the well-loved first book, which is one of my personal favorites in children's literature, and having read this as a part of the Sonlight Curriculum when I was a girl in school, I immensely enjoyed the sensation of reading this story and sharing it both in book and movie form with my children. Set on the American prairie in the late 19th century, Anna and her brother Caleb live with their widower father on their farm. The trajectory of their shared life starts to change shape when their papa has an answer to his advertisement in the paper for a wife and mother to join their family. It's not hard to see that Sarah's entry into their lives from distant Maine will have a lasting impression on each member of the family, as well as Sarah herself. Some of the reasons I love this story is for its depth of character and humanity, as well as the way in which it gently deals with mature emotional themes. I had read the first 3 books in the series as a young person, but the last 2 books were new to me as my children and I read them together. Each book carries well the themes begun in its opening story, with the characters continuing to develop and process the passing of life's seasons. Another interesting factor in the series as a whole was the element of perspective shifts that happened when the author changed the storyteller, which start with Anna's voice in the first 2 books and move to Caleb's experience and Caleb's story, with the final 2 installments in the series being narrated by Anna and Caleb's half-siblings. Originally, this book was my personal selection that I read during the week when we did a unit study on chickens, but that changed when my children were intrigued by the eye-catching illustrations and photos that are spread generously throughout the text. And, long story short is, the interest persisted long enough for us to be able to add this title to our growing book list this year. We instantly related to this memoir because we have 3 backyard chickens ourselves, and like the author, we live in Massachusetts. We were entertained and delighted by the author's observations on her quirky hen's personalities, the flock's friendships and rivalries, and how she and her husband and daughter interacted with the girls. This homey and charming story encompasses both the humor that comes from enjoying and caring for animals, as well as the heartbreak. Overall, a very fun and memorable read. Robert McCloskey is a favorite author in our home, with his Blueberries for Sal and Make Way for Ducklings being picture books consistently available on our shelves. The opening story in Homer Price lived up to our expectations as Homer and his adopted skunk, Aroma, relieve the town of Centerburg of a couple of bank robbers. Subsequent stories have us meeting a superhero in a predicament, participating in a donut eating contest, observing the 2 suitors of Miss Terwilliger compete for her hand by unraveling their individual yarn collections, and more, all in the quintessential small-town, America-esque location of Centerburg, with Homer as our resident guide. This book made it to our reading list because of the stellar job the author-illustrator team did of representing a complex scientific concept in a very relatable way. The information on the formation and existence of black holes was made accessible through engaging and often humorous text, thorough but uncomplicated explanations, intriguing paintings paired with real telescopic images, and chapters left hanging with suspenseful questions. This was the perfect resource to give voice to the subject of black holes, as I had ordered this book from the library as a response to some questions and conversations my oldest and I had been having concerning them. Suffice to say, we all enjoyed and learned from this excellent introduction to black holes, which brought the matter home to our intellects and imaginations. I made this selection as a contribution to our week-long focus on the importance of names. We are introduced to Maria Isabel as she adjusts to her new life after her move from Puerto Rico to New York City. Attending school becomes a challenge when her new teacher decides to call her Mary as a way of differentiating her from the 2 other girls named Maria in her class, which causes Maria Isabel to feel a loss that starts to define important moments of finding herself and engaging in her new context. As part of her journey, Maria Isabel reads the book Charlotte's Web, which my children hadn't heard of yet, making it the next book we read. Charlotte's Web is a classic in children's literature, one that was read to me as a child, and is a tender story of friendship that begins on a farm and touches on the themes of love, life, and death. A runt pig is rescued by a girl named Fern, who names her new pet Wilbur. Once old enough to be weaned, Wilbur goes to live at the farm next door and develops a friendship with a creature that most in the barnyard seem to misunderstand and perhaps even revile. When it becomes clear that Wilbur's life hangs by a thread, his newfound friend, Charlotte the Spider, resolves to save him, using her thread-making capabilities. We spent a week with Galileo, and this selection from the well-known series Who HQ was a lovely counterpart to our other activities. Who Was Galileo offers a simple yet complete portrait of this brilliant figure in scientific history, who lived in Italy during the Renaissance. Despite living in this era of scientific expansion and discovery, Galileo found himself at odds with the institutional church when he made the claim, based on his observations, that the Earth revolves around the sun, rather than the sun around the Earth, which was widely believed in his day, and the official position of the church at that time. Considering Galileo and his life led to some beneficial conversations with the kids about truth and what it may look like to seek and speak it out. A fun complement to our fascinating unit study on crickets, the cricket in Times Square was recommended in the God's Big World Parent-Teacher Guide. I was familiar with this title as it was included as a read aloud in the Sonlight Curriculum, and I found it all the more interesting to revisit as an adult. Chester, the cricket, accidentally transported in a picnic basket from a meadow in Connecticut to a New York City subway station, finds that his singing stands out in sharp contrast to all the other noises of the city, and that's how he's discovered by Mario, a struggling newsstand boy, and Tucker, the gutter mouse. With his new friends, Chester settles into city life with the hope of being a help to Mario and his newsstand business. This autumn at Read Aloud Revival, Sarah Mackenzie selected several picture books on bears to highlight in the premium package, which led me to include this chapter book in our reading time. Another familiar Sonlight pick, this simple story follows Jonathan as he accomplishes an errand his mother gave him that requires him to cross over Hemlock Mountain. The grown-ups all tell him there are no bears on Hemlock, but Jonathan discovers along the way, as he cleverly evades the bears that he comes upon, that sometimes the things people tell you aren't always true. On my shelf already because of Sonlight, The Apprentice, which is set in Florence, Italy during the Renaissance, was the perfect complement to our unit study on painting and murals, as well as connecting us with another take on life around the time and place where Galileo lived. 13-year-old Ardunio wants to be a painter, and so his father apprentices him to the great Maestro Cosimo. But within the first month of his apprenticeship, Ardunio discovers a sinister secret that reveals the extreme measures the maestro is willing to take because of jealousy. This leaves Ardunio with a choice to make that may cost him his only chance to pursue his life's dream. I enjoyed how each chapter title in this book was the Spanish name for a fruit or a vegetable and became a way to mark and understand the passing seasons. This becomes especially relevant to the story after Esperanza and her mother are forced to flee Mexico following the death of her father, and traveled to California in the U.S. during the Great Depression to join the migrant farm workers whose work revolves around what needs to be harvested. Having lived a life of privilege as landowners in Mexico, Esperanza finds the adjustment to the conditions of hard labor and less than comfortable accommodations quite challenging. But things come into sharp focus for her when her mother falls dangerously ill. Based on actual details from the author's ancestors' lives, this was a compelling riches to rags story. I came upon these books after finishing and absolutely loving another book, Sweep, by author Jonathan Auxier in my personal reading journey. Knowing that Sweep contains some elements that I'm not yet ready to introduce to my children, I thought the next best thing would be to see if Auxier had written anything else for their age, and I was so pleased to discover that indeed he had, in the form of The Fabled Stables. I'm even more pleased to say that this series is a highlight of our reading list this year, as we joined Augie, the Fabled Stables caretaker, on his adventures to rescue endangered, one-of-a-kind magical creatures. This is introductory fantasy at its best, and kept us on the edge of our seats, as Augie embarked on 3 separate rescue adventures. These books are wonderfully crafted, with the perfect amount of suspense and danger without any nightmare-inducing elements. And the vibrant illustrations on most pages are vital to the story. I highly recommend this series, and I'm looking forward to the next time we can read another selection from this gifted author. This delightful, fresh take on a fairy tale is a favorite my mom read to me when I requested it at a young age, which makes it all the more fun to read to my children. Our story opens in the kingdom of Phantasmorania, where the kingdom is planning to celebrate the arrival of a 7th princess, Princess Amethyst. When it comes time for all the fairies to bestow upon the baby princess all of the virtues they are equipped to gift, the fairy Crustacia surprises everyone by giving Princess Amethyst the gift of ordinariness. Unlike her 6 older, more beautiful, refined sisters, Princess Amy, as she comes to be called, has ordinary brown hair and freckles, seeks out adventure, and isn't interested in marrying someone just because he's a prince. When her royal parents contrive to marry her off by hiring a dragon to be slayed by some brave, young, regal volunteer, Amy runs away and seeks employment completely undetected in the neighboring kingdom's palace kitchen. This book, which was written in London, was our chosen accompaniment to the unit study we did on England's monarchy. Reading this classic work was also inspired by our English monarch unit study, as this story starts in the English countryside as we join Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, who have been evacuated from London during World War II, and are settling into their living arrangements in a large house belonging to an older professor. They have no idea that a portal to the world of Narnia lies undiscovered in a wardrobe of coats, but through a series of events the children come to enter this world together, only to find that their arrival was expected and hoped for. The situation is dire as the White Witch has laid her claim on Aslan's creation and has locked the whole of Narnia in perpetual winter. This story is especially meaningful to me as Lewis wrote this as an allegory of Christ redeeming the world through his death on the cross, but I imagine that the drama of the narrative would captivate believer and non-believer alike. I searched out this children's version of the classic Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan because I had the opportunity to take my children to a theater production of the story, and it was important to me for them to have an idea of the characters and storyline before experiencing the onstage drama. As I remarked in one of my videos already, it was interesting to read this classic allegory of the Christian's journey to heaven back to back with Lewis's allegory of Jesus' death and resurrection. As we journey with Pilgrim to the Celestial City, we are afforded the opportunity to learn along with him from the places that he encounters, the people he meets, and the sufferings he endures. This fresh retelling of this best-selling story features kid-friendly language in verse form, as well as colorful illustrations that bring this epic quest to life for young readers or listeners. This American Girl collection was the last book that we read this year, which actually is a gathering of the 6 Kirsten books in one volume. This was so very convenient as we read through her story and enjoyed her experiences as a Swedish pioneer of the 1850s on the American frontier in Minnesota. We read through the American Girl collection of Addie last year and have found that these well-written stories grab our attention, even that of my 2-year-old. Kirsten is a strong, determined girl who loves her family, and the stories follow her and her family as they move from their home in Sweden to America, where they make a new home through much hard work and help from their community. Oh, that was quite a list. We have benefited so much from incorporating reading aloud into our school year this past year, and we have already started into our list for this present year, 2023. So maybe I'll have another list to share at the end of 2023. Well, all the best on your learning journeys.